Are you deaf or just incompetent? Andrew Cross snapped, his voice echoing through the private jet. The flight attendant didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She simply looked him in the eyes and said one word that shattered his world. That name. That voice. It couldn't be. Beneath his billionaire arrogance and tailored perfection, Andrew was a man slowly crumbling under the weight of betrayal, emptiness, and a love he never got closure from. Until she appeared again, thousands of feet above the world he thought he controlled. Welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Andrew Cross stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his $20 million penthouse, watching the city pulse with artificial life. Cars buzzed below, neon lights flickered on distant billboards, and people moved in hurried packs, driven by purpose or pretense, much like himself. The skyline reflected off the glass, but so did something else. A man with everything and nothing at the same time. He adjusted the gold cufflinks on his custom Italian shirt, poured himself a glass of aged whiskey, and leaned against the window frame. Silence hung in the air, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that screamed louder than any noise. He had built an empire from scratch: software, media, investments, real estate. At 34, his net worth danced near $1 billion. Yet the empire felt hollow. The boardroom victories had stopped feeling like triumphs. Every new business partner came with a knife ready to plunge into his back. Lovers came and went, interested in his status, not his soul. And his friends bought with favors and fine dinners. He was lonely, not alone. That made it worse. He walked into the ultra-modern kitchen and stared at a granite countertop that had never seen a homemade meal. The fridge was stocked with expensive wines, imported water, and untouched health food. A cold life built on precision and performance. His phone buzzed. Assistant, text jets ready. Wheels up in 3 hours. Europe itinerary as requested. You'll have full privacy. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The only thing he had more than money was silence and control. Or so he thought. He sat on the edge of his king-sized bed, alone again, and opened a small wooden drawer. Inside was a faded photo. 2 teenagers standing in the rain, laughing, soaked to the bone, carefree and covered in mud. Her name was scribbled in messy handwriting on the back. Serena L. Promise me we'll always find each other. He hadn't seen her in over 15 years. One day she was there. The next gone. No goodbye. No reason. Just vanished like a ghost. He searched for her for years until his heartbreak hardened into silence. She was part of the old Andrew, the dreamer, the lover, the artist, the boy who died somewhere along the road to riches. He put the photo back, closed the drawer, and reached for his sunglasses. In the elevator down, his reflection looked flawless, custom suit, jawline sharp as his words. But he could still feel the ache in his chest. He knew what they called him in boardrooms and tabloids. The Ice Prince. Mr. Untouchable. The ruthless visionary. No one saw the man behind the empire. And he made sure of it. He stepped into the black Rolls-Royce waiting downstairs as the driver pulled away. Andrew took one last look at the city through the tinted windows and muttered almost to himself, "People love what I have, not who I am." He had no idea that this trip, a simple, mindless escape, would bring him face to face with the only person who ever did love him for who he truly was, and that the sky would become the place where he finally came down to earth. The engines roared softly beneath the plush floors of Andrew Cross's private jet, a Gulfstream G650, the kind billionaires used when they didn't want to be seen. Everything inside screamed status. Marble countertops, polished leather seats, mood lighting calibrated to reduce jet lag. It was sterile perfection curated by assistants he barely spoke to. Andrew sat reclined in his seat, legs crossed, laptop open, though he hadn't typed a word in an hour. The screen glowed dimly, an empty email draft staring back at him. He closed it, rubbed his temples, and sighed. Even up here, above the noise of the world, he couldn't silence the discontent chewing through his chest. A flight attendant walked past. Young female, neat bun, polite smile. She offered a nod as she placed a silver tray on the side table. A cup of coffee piping hot. He looked at it blankly, then frowned. "Where's the ginger tea?" he asked, voice sharp but quiet. The attendant turned around, confusion on her face. "Excuse me, sir." Ginger tea, he repeated louder this time. No caffeine. I specifically request it before every flight. Don't tell me you forgot. The cabin grew colder. The pilot and co-pilot exchanged a look from the cockpit, used to his mood swings. But this one felt different, more personal, more raw. The woman didn't flinch. Her hands didn't shake. Her posture didn't shift. She simply stood there, calm and collected. The only moving thing in a storm of expensive silence. Apologies, she said slowly. I assumed the order from your team was correct. I'll make it right. But she didn't sound apologetic, just composed. And then she added, almost under her breath, but loud enough to hear. You still get cranky when you don't get your ginger tea, huh? His head snapped up. The familiarity in her tone was disarming, casual, knowing, personal. His gaze locked onto her face. For the first time since boarding, he actually looked at her. Her eyes, a slightly crooked smile, a beauty not manufactured by money but made richer by time. She had a presence not from training but from history. What did you just say? He asked, his voice low and tense. She stepped closer, just a half step close enough for him to see the tiny birthmark near her temple. And suddenly it hit him. Not like a gentle memory, but like a wave crashing into a brittle wall. Joe. One word. One name. The name only one person had ever called him. The nickname that died the day she disappeared. His breath caught in his throat. He blinked. No, it couldn't be. Not here. Not now. Serena. She nodded, her lips pressing into a soft smile. A stranger. His chest collapsed inward. The years vanished like smoke. The luxury plane, the billions in assets, the empire. None of it mattered. His heart was hammering so loud he was sure she could hear it. You're real, he whispered. I thought I made you up after a while. I'm real, she said, voice steady but laced with emotion. And I've been standing right in front of you for the last 15 minutes while you threw a tantrum about tea. He laughed, a sharp exhale that turned into a half sob. Then, without thinking, without permission, he rose from his seat across the narrow aisle and pulled her into an embrace. She didn't resist. Her arms slid around him slowly, like they were finding their home again. I looked for you, he said into her shoulder. I looked everywhere, Serena. What happened? Where did you go? Her voice was barely audible. I didn't want to leave. My family had to, we didn't have a choice. Everything changed overnight. I lost everything, including you. Silence. Then tears, his not hers, fell quietly onto her shoulder. For the first time in over a decade, Andrew Cross cried. Not for business. Not for betrayal. But for a part of himself he thought was gone forever and had just walked back into his life at 35,000 feet. He let go, but not fully. His hands stayed on her shoulders as he looked into her face again, trying to process it all. You're the only person I ever let in, he said. And then you were gone. After that, I stopped letting anyone close. She nodded, her own eyes glassy. I can tell, a quiet pause. Then he whispered, what are the chances that after all these years I'd find you here? She smiled gently. Maybe life finally got tired of keeping us apart. The cabin of the jet was still the usual white noise of air pressure hummed faintly. But inside the luxurious space, time had stopped. Andrew hadn't returned to his seat. He couldn't. He stood frozen, staring at Serena like she had just walked out of a dream he barely dared to remember. The scent of jasmine. The way she tilted her head slightly when she listened. That crooked smile. It was all there. It was her. His voice cracked as he whispered again. Serena. She smiled gently, tears threatening to break through. Ide. No one had called him that in 15 years. Not his lovers. Not his friends. Just her. That name was sacred, buried in the version of him he tried to forget. The boy who sketched portraits in the back of math class, who wrote love notes folded into origami hearts, who once promised a girl forever under a bleacher during a rainstorm. You disappeared, he said. No goodbye. No note. I thought you left me. Serena exhaled, pain flickering in her eyes. I never wanted to leave. We didn't have a choice. She glanced around. A couple of other flight crew discreetly moved to the back of the cabin, sensing the intimacy of the moment. She gestured to a seat across from him. Can we sit? Andrew nodded, still in a haze. They sank into the plush leather seats opposite each other, knees almost touching. Serena folded her hands in her lap, collecting herself. It was fast. One night, my dad came home pale, said we had to leave the country immediately. Legal trouble. He'd been hiding things from us. Mom was crying. We packed what we could in 6 hours. I tried to find you day. I wrote a letter, but there was no time. We flew to London that morning. Andrew leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clenched. I thought I wasn't enough. I thought maybe you got bored or moved on. It messed me up, Serena, for years. I know, she said quietly. I looked for you too after things settled. But you had changed your number, deleted your old socials. By the time I found a press article about you, you were already famous and angry. He laughed bitterly. Yeah, anger's easy when you don't want to feel anything else. Serena's eyes softened. I saw the interviews, the way you looked at people cold like you were somewhere else. But I knew that look. That was your hiding face. He blinked. You remember that? She nodded. You'd get that same expression when your dad missed your art shows or when your teachers told you to stop daydreaming. You'd shut down. Wear that same mask. Andrew swallowed hard, the words hitting deeper than she could know. Silence fell between them again. Not awkward but heavy. Thick with memories. I didn't just miss you, Andrew said finally. I lost myself when you left. I didn't know who I was without you. So I built something. Something no one could take from me. Your empire, she said, understanding. Your fortress. He nodded brick by brick. Money, power, walls no one could climb. Serena tilted her head, studying him. And are you happy inside that fortress? That question landed like a punch to the chest. He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the window. Clouds rolled beneath them, vast and unreachable. No, he said at last. I'm not. Serena reached forward, gently placing her hand on his. The warmth shocked him. Then maybe this flight isn't just taking you to Paris, she said softly. Maybe it's bringing you back to yourself. For a long moment they just sat there. Her hand on his. His defense is finally starting to crack. And then he said something he hadn't said in years. Not even to himself. I missed you. Every day. Every year. Even when I tried to forget, you were in the songs, the sketches, the coffee shops, the rain. She looked down, a tear finally slipping down her cheek. I missed you too, Day. So much. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a second, letting the silence embrace them both. Up here, where few things touched him, where the world was always distant. Andrew Cross had just been brought back to earth by a single word, a name, a voice he thought he'd never hear again. And for the first time in over a decade, he didn't feel empty. He felt seen. The jet touched down in London for an overnight layover. Andrew's team had booked the most private and extravagant suite in one of the city's finest hotels. He barely noticed. His mind was still 35,000 feet in the air, tangled in memories and the warmth of the woman who had shattered his composure with a single word, Day. He didn't speak much in the car ride to the hotel, and neither did Serena. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, thick with the kind of silence that follows a revelation. She hadn't gone back to the crew quarters. She sat beside him, arms crossed, stealing occasional glances out the window, her breath fogging the glass. Andrew caught himself watching her reflection more than the city lights. Once they were inside the suite, the awkward formality cracked. Can I get you something? Andrew asked, halfway between host and hurricane. Serena smiled faintly. Water's fine. He poured her a glass from the crystal decanter near the minibar and handed it to her, their fingers brushing. Sparks again, so small, so obvious. She sat on the edge of a leather sofa, sipping slowly, while he remained standing, pacing slightly like a caged thought. I still can't believe it's you, he said. After all these years. Serena looked up. Sometimes. I wondered if you even remembered me. He scoffed, almost offended. I tried to forget you. God knows I tried. But no matter how loud the world got, you were always in the quiet. Silence fell again, but this one was a thread of invitation. Tell me everything, he said finally. Start with that night. Why did you leave without saying goodbye? She nodded slowly, then spoke, her voice calm, steady, but laced with memory. It wasn't my choice, Day. That night my father came home, said we had to pack everything immediately. No questions. He was in trouble, embezzlement, tax fraud. I didn't even know what half of it meant back then. We were gone before sunrise. I begged my mom to let me call you. Just 1 minute. She said it was too risky. Jesus, Andrew whispered, sinking into the chair across from her. I don't know what I thought, that you ghosted me, that you got bored of our little town of me. Serena shook her head slowly, eyes wet. I was in love with you, Andrew. I cried every day for months. I wrote you letters but never mailed them. I didn't even know where to send them after a while." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was going to ask you to come with me," he said. "Remember that night on the football field? I told you I was going to New York after graduation to start over. I was going to ask you to come." Her lips trembled. "I would have said yes." Those 5 words changed the temperature of the room. They stared at each other, stripped of everything but the truth. "What happened after?" Andrew asked gently. "Where'd you go?" "We stayed in London for a while. Dad got arrested eventually. My mom took a job in Spain. I worked small jobs, tried to stay under the radar. Eventually, I got into aviation school. I liked flying. I liked being nowhere." "Being nowhere," Andrew repeated. "Isn't that what I've been doing this whole time?" She looked at him closely, softly. "You don't look like a man who landed where he wanted to be." He smiled bitterly. "I landed all right. Right into isolation, betrayal, lawsuits, fake friends, and a whole lot of meaningless success. And somehow in all that, I forgot how to be human." Serena tilted her head just slightly. "And how does it feel?" "Like I'm waking up," he whispered. "Like you just flipped a light switch I forgot existed." She stood, then walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. Andrew followed after a moment, standing beside her. "You know what I missed most?" she said, still watching the storm. "Your sketchbook. That blue one. You used to draw people when they weren't looking." He laughed. "I still do that. Only now it's on an iPad I barely touch." She turned to him, serious now. "Do you still draw for yourself?" The question hit like truth always does, quiet but devastating. "No," he said. Serena reached up, gently touched his chest with 2 fingers. "Then maybe it's time you remember how." And there it was. Not just a reunion but a reckoning. The past hadn't returned to haunt him. It had returned to heal him. They stood side by side, 2 silhouettes against the stormy skyline. No longer just memories of each other, but witnesses to the people they'd become. "Do you think we were meant to meet again?" he asked, his voice low. Serena glanced at him, her eyes softer than they'd ever been. "Maybe we never stopped." Paris looked different this time. Andrew's private driver dropped them off at his apartment in the 7th arrondissement, a place that had never felt like home. Everything about the space was deliberate, expensive, and emotionally sterile. Black marble floors, abstract art curated by auction houses, an interior design that screamed power but whispered nothing about personality. The kind of place meant to impress others, not to comfort yourself. But now, walking through the door with Serena beside him, it suddenly felt too quiet. She stepped inside slowly, scanning the apartment with a half-smile. "You've done well," she said, running her hand along a polished stone countertop. "Too well," he muttered, setting down his bag. "I built a life so clean no one could touch me and somehow ended up untouched." Serena looked at him. "I used to imagine where you'd end up, but not like this." He turned, leaning against the counter, arms folded. "Not like what?" "Not so sad," she said, "honest but not cruel. Not so hidden." That word hit harder than she knew. Hidden because that's what he'd been doing all this time, behind board meetings, headlines, lovers, lawsuits. He'd turned himself into a myth so no one could hurt the man underneath. She walked slowly through the living room, her eyes landing on a shelf full of untouched books, a few awards collecting dust, and a closed sketchbook lying at the edge of the desk. "You still draw?" she asked. "Not really," he replied. "Too many distractions." "Or too many walls," she said gently. He didn't answer. He walked over, opened the sketchbook and handed it to her. Inside were sharp, minimalist pencil sketches, mostly buildings, abstract lines, eyes with no faces. It was skilled, technically perfect, but emotionless. "You used to draw with feeling," she said softly, flipping through the pages. "Now you draw like someone trying to hide what they feel." He sat down across from her, finally tired of pretending. "I don't know how to feel anymore, Serena. Somewhere between the boardrooms, betrayals, and being a headline. I forgot who I was." "You never forgot," she said. "You buried it. And maybe you buried him because losing me hurt more than you let yourself believe." His jaw tightened. She was right. He had buried the boy who once sang out of tune in the car just to make her laugh, who stayed up late sketching her under streetlights, who believed love could actually save someone. Losing her broke him and he never healed. He just replaced the wound with ambition. He stood suddenly, pacing. "You know what hurts the most," he said, voice rising. "That I did all of this, thinking maybe one day you'd see it and come back. But none of it brought you back. None of it mattered." Serena stood too, closing the sketchbook. I didn't come back because of the success. I came back by accident, remember? A twist of fate. But I stayed because the real you is still in there. I saw him. The moment you looked at me and cried. Andrew turned away. His shoulders hunched slightly. You're the only person who ever saw me and didn't want to change me. Serena stepped closer. 'Cause I loved all of you. Even the parts you hated. He turned back around, and for the first time since she'd re-entered his life, he looked different. Not put together. Not polished. Just real. Eyes red. Guard down. She reached for his hand. Let yourself be soft again, Day. You don't have to keep wearing this armor with me. Pause. Then a breath. And Andrew stepped forward, resting his forehead gently against hers. No performance. No seduction. Just intimacy, raw and honest. I don't know how to be that person anymore, he whispered. Then let me help you remember, she said. And there, in a cold apartment built by ego and fear, warmth bloomed between them. It wasn't lust. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something new, a second chance. They moved to the couch, curled up like old friends rediscovering their rhythm. No pressure. No rush. Just presence. Andrew spoke about his betrayals. How his best friend stole from him. How his last partner cheated. How the world told him to be ruthless or be crushed. Serena listened, not to judge but to witness. Her presence was soft but firm. The kind that anchored you without making you feel stuck. You don't need to prove anything to me, she said as the city lights outside flickered. I loved you and I still don't, he murmured. Not anything that matters. That's not true, she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. You have me. And for the first time in 15 years, Andrew Cross felt something he hadn't felt since she left. Say. Andrew Cross didn't tell anyone where he was going. Not even his assistant. After so many years of living a scheduled life dictated by time zones, contracts, and meetings, he made a rare decision. He turned everything off. No email. No calls. No headlines. Just him and Serena. They arrived at the villa the next morning. A quiet place nestled on a cliffside overlooking the Mediterranean. The air smelled of salt and wild lavender. The villa was old but beautifully kept, with faded terracotta walls, a vine-covered veranda, and a view that seemed to stretch into forever. Andrew's team had bought the property years ago for privacy, but he'd only visited once. Now, as he unlocked the wooden doors and stepped into the warm light, he realized something strange. For the first time in forever, he wasn't rushing. It's beautiful, Serena said, standing barefoot on the stone balcony, her hair catching the breeze. It doesn't look like your usual style. That's because no one designed it for appearances, he said. It's just real. She smiled. Exactly. They spent the first day in silence. Not avoidance but comfort. Andrew cooked for the first time in years, fumbling through pasta and overcooked garlic. Serena laughed when he nearly set off the fire alarm. You used to make the worst grilled cheese in town, she said as they sat at the outdoor table, eating their mess under the stars. And I loved every bite. You said it tasted like smoke and heartbreak, he replied, grinning. They both laughed, not just at the memory but at the strange, warm feeling of being far from the world. No cameras, no expectations, just two people finding their way back. On the third morning, Serena found Andrew sitting under a fig tree with a sketch pad in his lap. He didn't hear her approach, too focused on the page. She glanced over his shoulder. He was drawing the sea, but not as it looked, as it felt. The lines were softer now, less perfection, more expression. You're drawing again, she said. For me this time, he replied, closing the sketchbook. Not for galleries, not for critics, just for the boy who used to love this. Serena sat beside him. That boy's still here. I see him more every day. You make it safe to be him again. That night, they lit a fire in the stone hearth. Andrew opened a bottle of vintage wine he'd been saving for some day. He poured it slowly, thoughtfully, and handed her a glass. They sat across from each other, the fire casting soft shadows on their faces. Serena curled her legs under herself, watching the flames dance. Do you think we could have made it work back then? She asked. Andrew stared into the fire for a moment before answering. Maybe not. We were young. The world pulled us apart before we had the chance to learn how to fight for each other. He turned to her. But now, I know exactly what I lost. And I know I don't ever want to lose it again. Serena's eyes glistened. She placed her glass down, moved closer. Then don't say it. Show it. Choose me, Andrew. Choose us. Every day. He didn't reply. He leaned in and kissed her. Not with urgency or possession, but with gratitude. A kiss that said thank you for coming back to me. A kiss that felt like a beginning. By the 7th day, Andrew was different. He smiled more, laughed freely, cooked, danced barefoot in the kitchen, and sat on the balcony to sketch the sunrise before she woke. Serena watched him with quiet awe. He wasn't a billionaire here. He wasn't the ice prince or the ruthless CEO. He was just Andrew, the boy she loved, grown into a man she could love even more. As they stood at the edge of the cliff that evening, watching the waves crash below, Serena leaned against him. "You're not running anymore," she whispered. "No," he said. "I'm not chasing either. For the first time I'm standing still. And it feels like I'm finally living. With me." He turned, kissed her forehead and smiled. "Only with you." The sky darkened into shades of violet and rose gold. And as night fell, so did the final pieces of the walls Andrew had spent years building. He was no longer falling apart. He was falling forward. The weekend nights had passed like a dream. Soft, slow and sacred. But even dreams have their endings. Andrew stood beside Serena on the sun-warmed tarmac, watching the jet being prepped for the return flight to New York. His assistant had finally tracked him down, gently reminding him of meetings postponed, press waiting, and deals on the verge of collapse. For once he didn't care. "So, back to reality," Serena said quietly, adjusting her ponytail as the wind tugged gently at her jacket. Andrew turned to her, his expression unreadable, part reflective, part afraid. "Do we have to go back?" he asked, half joking but not really. She smiled, sad but sure. "We do. But going back doesn't mean going backward." He looked at her for a long time. "What if we lose this once the noise returns?" She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then we make a new kind of noise. Together." The ground crew motioned that the plane was ready. The door was open. The engines were humming softly. Serena reached for her bag and began walking toward the steps. Andrew didn't follow. She turned around halfway up the stairs and saw him standing still on the tarmac, eyes fixed on her like she might vanish if he blinked. "Andrew," she called. But he didn't respond. Instead, he walked slowly to the edge of the steps and then, in front of the pilots, the crew and his watching assistant nearby, he dropped to one knee. "Andrew," she called. But he didn't respond. Instead, he walked slowly to the edge of the steps and then, in front of the pilots, the crew and his watching assistant nearby, he dropped to one knee. No ring. No speech prepared. Just emotion. Raw. Undeniable. Serena froze wide-eyed. "I don't have a ring," he said, voice trembling. "Because I didn't plan this. But I know I've spent too many years building a life that didn't matter, just to impress people I don't trust. And now I'm standing here, finally knowing what matters." He looked up into her eyes. "You were my beginning. You're my middle. And I want you to be my end." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She hadn't cried this freely in years. "I don't need a ring," she whispered. "I just need you to mean it." He stood, eyes locked on hers. "I've never meant anything more in my entire life." Serena nodded once, then closed the space between them and pulled him into a kiss. A full, deep, unapologetic kiss right there on the runway. The crew looked away. His assistant smiled and pretended to check her tablet. They sat side by side on the jet, hands clasped like they were afraid to let go. Not because they feared losing each other, but because they had finally found what they were missing all along. Andrew stared out the window at the clouds, his thumb brushing over Serena's hand. "Do you think people like us get second chances?" "No," Serena said softly, her head resting on his shoulder. "I think we get the right one at the right time." "So this isn't the end of the story?" he asked. "No," she smiled. "It's the part where the real story begins." Back in Manhattan, Andrew stood in front of a mirror. Same apartment, same city, but he looked different. His tie was gone. His eyes were soft. His energy was quiet, not heavy. A sketchbook sat open on the counter behind him, a new one. Inside were drawings of a woman, smiling in sunlight. Of a fig tree. Of waves. Of hands holding hands. Of hope. Serena walked in wearing his shirt, brushing her hair back, sleepy but glowing. "You coming to bed?" she asked. Andrew smiled. "Yeah, I just wanted to look at the man I am now." She stepped closer, kissed his cheek and whispered, "I like him. He looks like someone I could grow old with." "He looks like someone who's finally alive," Andrew replied. Andrew's story isn't just about falling back in love. It's about choosing vulnerability, confronting the pain he buried, and allowing someone to see the parts of him he thought no one could ever love. Serena didn't save him. She reminded him of who he always was. He didn't just fall in love again. He rose in it. The air smelled like thyme and summer rain. Serena stood barefoot in the kitchen, humming quietly as she sliced strawberries into a bowl of cream. The windows were open and a soft breeze moved through the linen curtains. A year ago, she'd been working 12-hour flights, sleeping in cramped quarters, and watching love stories play out between strangers while hers remained a ghost. Now the only flight she was planning was for pleasure, to Florence next month for their first anniversary. She glanced down at the simple gold band on her finger. No diamond. No grand ceremony. Just a quiet vow in a garden in Paris, surrounded by 5 people and a promise that mattered more than any performance ever could. The back door creaked open and she smiled without turning around. "You're late," she teased. "I got distracted by the sky," Andrew's voice answered behind her. "You wouldn't believe the way the clouds were moving this morning." He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. His beard tickled her neck. "You sound like a painter," she said. "I feel like one," he murmured. And he did, since they'd left the noise behind, sold off the board seats, stepped back from the company, said no to the chaos. Andrew had become something new. Or rather, returned to someone old. He spent his mornings sketching in the sunroom, his afternoons reading, and his evenings with her, cooking, walking, laughing. He still had the empire, still had wealth, influence, all the things that once consumed him. But now none of it owned him. "You have paint on your elbow," she said, smiling as she turned in his arms. "Occupational hazard." He leaned down and kissed her softly, a kiss full of routine and reverence. "What's for breakfast?" he asked. "Strawberries, fresh cream, honey from the farmer's market. And if you make the coffee, I might let you stay." A tempting offer. He moved to the espresso machine, the one she teased him about splurging on. She sat at the small kitchen table and watched him work, still a little amazed at how different he was. Not because he'd changed, but because he'd allowed himself to. They spent the morning on the birds singing, fresh bread between them, silence that felt full, not awkward. At one point, Serena opened her journal and began writing. Andrew glanced over, curious. "Another letter to your future self?" he asked. "No," she said, smiling softly. "To the girl I used to be, the one who thought she'd never be found again." He nodded slowly. "What would you tell her?" Serena looked up at him, her eyes warm. That healing doesn't always come in the form of a miracle. Sometimes it arrives slowly in pieces. In a familiar voice on an unfamiliar flight. In a name you thought you'd never hear again. And that one day you'll stand in the sun with someone who knows every broken part of you and chooses you anyway. Andrew reached over, took her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist. "You know," he said, "I never really believed in fate. And now I think it believed in us." They took a walk through the lavender fields as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the landscape. Andrew had brought his sketchbook, stopping every so often to scribble a tree, a line of hills, a breeze he couldn't quite capture. Serena watched him from a few steps ahead, her heart full. He caught up to her, laced his fingers through hers, and together they watched the sky turn shades of purple and pink. "You know what I realized?" Andrew said. "What?" "I used to think love was supposed to feel like fireworks. Big, loud, overwhelming. But this right here, your hand in mine, the sun going down, knowing you'll be beside me tomorrow. This is what it really is." "Home," she whispered. "Exactly." Later that night, they lay in bed, the windows open, the stars above them silent witnesses. "Do you think we found our happy ending?" Serena asked. Andrew turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "No," he said. "I think we found our beginning." And with that, they fell asleep in each other's arms, not chasing the future, not haunted by the past, just present and finally whole. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.